Call to order, Town of Prescott Valley Study Session, December 5th, 2024. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Freund. Councilmember Searcher.
Here.
Councilmember Greer.
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson.
Here.
Councilmember Schumacher.
Present.
Vice Mayor Hunt. Mayor Pagoda.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. We're going to kind of shuffle up the agenda a little bit today, folks. So we're going to start with item 2C, Town Code, Chapter 14, Subdivision Engineering Standards. We have via remotely, Mr. Cassidy. Is that correct? Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Donna Kennedy here, Development Services Department. Well, we just got done with Chapter 13, Chapter 13 code update, and it took a lot of work and your input for us to get it across the finish line. Well, now we're here with 14. We've got a subdivision and plat chapter that we're revising and updating, and it's about the design of sites, what's necessary to confirm a site at the final development plan. And we've got Frank Cassidy, who helped us with 13, helping us with this. This is our first step in the process, the study session, to get your input. I believe in your packets, we have the first red line version. And please, if there's anything that you see that triggers your mind, that's something you might think of in development that we may want to include, let us know. We hope to be done in a couple months, hopefully by spring, to come back with you with the final draft. But pending input and input from the public and our stakeholders, and Frank's revision of it, we and our town engineer, John Latier, and the development services engineer, Brian Reed, were review this for its proficiency for site development as they know it as they're looking at projects throughout the course of the process. So I'll turn it over for Frank. He's got the first version. He wanted to run and review it with you, and then we're happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Welcome, Mr. Cassidy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is really an initial draft. The main thing that this draft does, is it converts most of the processes to administrative processes. And we've talked about this previously in relation to Chapter 13, the zoning chapter. But in Chapter 14, the subdivision processes are really what we call in the law, we call them ministerial processes. It's like going to the library to check out a book. As long as you haven't violated any of the rules, you're entitled to check out a book. Same is true with subdivision process, that, you know, as long as the subdivider is submitting the plat, and the plat conforms to all of the current rules, it must be approved. So to have it go through what looks like a legislative process, going to the council, for example, and to the commission, and then to the council for the final plat, it gives the impression to the public that it's a discretionary process, and it really is not a discretionary process, because the council is obligated really to approve the plat if it meets all the requirements. So because it's really administrative in nature, we're recommending that it go ahead and be changed so that the town engineer is actually the final determiner of whether the plat meets the requirements. And so these would not actually even come to the council. By state law, you can, if you want, continue to see them. But as I said before, it kind of gives it an impression to the public that you can do something about these things when you really can't do anything about them. Obviously, there are times when a council member sees something that a staff member doesn't. I've seen that maybe 3 times in the 40 years I've been doing these things. But overwhelmingly, when the council wants to try to do something, it's in response to outcry about development issues. And by the time of the subdivision plat, it's too late, really. I mean, the decision-making opportunity is really at the time of rezoning, not at the time of subdivision plat process. So in any event, as Donna said, this is an initial draft. I'm waiting for some initial feedback from the engineering folks so we can incorporate that into the draft, make some cleanup items. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council members might have about this.
Council, have you anything for Mr. Cassidy at this point in reference to this? I think, like you said, sir, it's more of an administrative policy that we're really looking at here. And there's a lot of times that council may want to weigh in on, perhaps the direction of the way a drive-through looks, and have a certain opinion in regards to what that is. And really, we rely on staff for that. So I think this is a good direction for us. Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Cassidy, I just wanted to let you know I'm still going through Chapter 14, but definitely if I see anything, I will definitely bring it to your attention and Donna's attention.
The other question I have, Mr. Cassidy, when do you think we see you again?
Well, I can come up for the final adoption if it's desired for me to come on up. If not, we would, just do this via Zoom if it doesn't look like there are going to be any major issues with it.
And that's a question, I think, for council. I myself have no issues with you being here via Zoom. It works well. I believe the audience can see you and hear you just as well as we can. And it is going to be 2025, so I think we can utilize technology to make it a little bit easier for everyone. But good to say that we can do this via Zoom. All right. Anything else for Mr. Cassidy? Is there anything else you have, sir?
I don't.
Kennedy?
Thank you, Mayor. No, nothing from our end, but as far as coming back to you for final draft, pending on what edits we have from our engineers, we hope within a couple months we'll be back.
Excellent. Thank you, ma'am. So moving on. Councilman.
Frank, I won't be seeing you again. This is my last meeting, but it's been a privilege and an honor working with you. And you've been so clear with us about the zoning laws, and we so appreciate everything that you have done. And I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I guess that's pretty much it, but it's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you, council member. It's been a pleasure working with you as well. Best of luck to you and Merry Christmas.
Item 2B, we're moving on. Revised Community Facilities District Policy and new debt management policy. Ms. Morris,
Thank you.
welcome.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, thank you for having us here tonight. Finance in support of the council's Vision 2024 focus area high performing teams, we're bringing forward a review of several of our financial policies. So as you know, the focus area wants us to determine what we do, how we do it, and who we do it for. So with keeping that in mind, we've come forward with revisions to 3 policies. As you know, financial policies are the cornerstone of sound financial administration. And so it's the way that the town remains aligned with the council's priorities and with ensuring a long-term financial stability. So it's really our framework for operational and strategic decision-making. Today we have 3 policies. We have the fiscal management policy. You might note that the only change that we're suggesting there at this time is to remove section N, which is the reference to the debt policy, as we'd like to form a standalone debt policy. We do plan to come to you in the spring with a comprehensive budget policy. And then the other one that we have is the community facilities district policy. To walk us through the changes, we do have 2 of our consultants here. Jaime Trejo from our PFM Financial Advisors will be walking us through the debt management policy, and then Paul Gales from Greenberg Treyrig will be here for the CFD policy. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, council. Thank you for this time. My name is Jaime Trejo, PFM Financial Advisors. I've worked with some of your neighbors not too far from here, town of Jerome, Cottonwood, Peoria, and school district, the Tulsa Unified School District. And in those, we have looked at the debt policies and have seen some improvement in the ratings as a result. So what we want to update today is have a standalone debt policy. The policy is based on best practices from the Government Finance Officers Association, or GFOA. GFOA has a number of best policies for debt management, budgeting, capital planning. Debt management is one of them. And if you're not familiar with GFOA, the town's ACFR actually received a Certificate of Achievement for Excellence Financial Reporting from GFOA. It's kind of a sense of pride from finance directors to get that in the CAFR, and you see that on page 6. Right, and the debt management policies we're talking about today are, provide written guidelines, allowances, and requirements that guide the process of debt evaluation and issuance practices. It articulates the goals, provides structuring guidelines, and demonstrates commitment to long-term capital and financial planning. And it also signals to the outside, to the capital markets, to rating agencies, that the town takes capital planning, debt planning very seriously. So it's an outward-facing policy that it's appreciated in the capital markets. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things we took into consideration when doing this policy is looking at how rating agencies look at debt management. I used to be an analyst at S&P. I was an analyst there for 5 years, rated things up and down California, Arizona, and the West. And in their assessment, about 20% of the credit rating is dedicated to financial management practice and policies. So an improvement in policies can actually bump up your credit rating because it's 20%. So an improvement in that score can actually have financial benefits when you issue debt. I'm going to go through the policy a little bit, just give you a broad overview. It lists the objectives, and the objectives of the policy, things that are important to the town: maintain sound financial position and minimize debt service and issuance costs. So 2 things our clients always look for when updating the debt policy. It discusses the types of debt you can issue: fixed rate, variable rate. It says the type you can't issue. You can't issue derivative products such as swaps. Also talks about the security, such as GO bonds, excise tax, revenue bonds for utilities. And it talks a little bit about the structure for new money and refundings. For new money, the maturity of the bonds, so the term the bonds are outstanding, cannot outlive the useful life of whatever it's financing. For refundings, we have a metric in there. So anytime bonds are refunded, it must produce savings of at least 3% on a present value basis of the refunded bonds. We also talk about, when we do a negotiated sale versus public sale. In a negotiated sale, you bring on an underwriter to help issue the bonds. In a competitive sale, the bonds are sold, at a certain date and time without an underwriter, and whoever bids the lowest TIC kind of wins. And that kind of wins. What else do we want to talk about? And lastly, there's just a lot of definitions in the policy. It kind of clarifies the roles of various consultants, what a financial advisor does, underwriter, bond counsel, disclosure counsel. We have a glossary in the back of terms. So the policy doesn't do anything really different than what you've been doing in the past. It just kind of solidifies best practices and the work the town has done. And that's kind of what I want to say.
Well, that was exciting. So basically, sir, just to clarify, you just cleaned up, added some stuff, made it very clear for future projects or anything else on basically a guideline or a blueprint for the town.
Correct.
All right, council, you have anything else? Do we have another speaker?
Yep, we do. All right. Next, we'll be talking about CFD policies. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. If you think debt policies are exciting, I got something better for you here. I am a lawyer with Greenberg Traurig. We are special counsel and bond counsel to the town as it relates to its financing matters. I've had the good fortune to work with the town for many years on their financing, so good to be back up before you all tonight. I'll say there's a bunch of pages in the Community Facilities District's policies and procedures. This is an update on already existing procedures. There's been changes in state law over the last several years, so we've tried to capture those, skinny up the procedures a little bit, if you can believe it or not, just to take out certain things that will never happen, certain financings that the town won't condone. And the basic premise of the policies is to try to limit any excessive tax exposure to citizens, make the CFDs self-supporting from a financing and a operation and maintenance perspective, and make sure that there's protections for the town in the form of indemnification, insurance, other things that we would ask anybody submitting an application to provide to the town so that these community facilities districts are self-supporting. There's a procedure in state law that lays out how these things are formed. An application must be submitted by the applicant, and state law lays out, here's what your application should show. What we do in the policies is put a little meat on the bones there so that folks submitting an application will know, here's what the town expects with respect to these. These are really the rules for the road. We don't want somebody coming in, dropping an application without reaching out to staff first, talking with finance first, town attorney and others. So we can kind of manage the process, slow it down a little bit, make sure before we ever come to you all for formation of a community facilities district, there's something that staff can actually recommend and shows that it's protecting of the town and the future district. So I'm glad to walk through the policy, but that's kind of the general idea behind the updates.
And again, in the past, the town has utilized CFDs, and they've been different each time. Some have been the same, some have been different, and they've basically left a bad taste in the mouths of former council members, current council members, citizens that are affected by it. And this is not any way approving any sort of CFD. We're just creating guidelines and expectations for in the event that a future council or a future developer wishes to attempt a CFD. Is that correct?
That's correct. This commits the town to nothing with respect to CFDs. It just lays out the rules of the road.
Vice Mayor?
And they're not automatically approved. The request isn't automatically approved if a developer asks for a CFD, correct?
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Hunt, no, there's no automatic approval. Approval of a CFD is solely at the discretion of the mayor and council.
Right, and if somebody applies for a CFD and meets all the requirements, which there's a lot more hoops than we used to have, and it'll comply with state law also, and receives a CFD, then the residents that buy within that project with the CFD are told in advance about the CFD, and they could pick whether or not they want to live there knowing about the CFD.
Vice Mayor Hunt, that's correct. That's part of the policies is to have home buyer disclosures. Obviously, you know, when folks buy a home, they get a stack of papers that show, but we try to make sure that the end users see that, are aware of that. It describes any type of tax or assessment burden. So that's part of the policies. And then when a district is actually formed, there's an agreement between the community facilities district and the developer where they also commit to provide those disclosures.
And the town may or may not ever use this policy.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Anything else, council? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
Lived up to expectations with that one. Ms. Morris?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, just to close the conversation, we do intend to bring the policies forward for approval at the next council meeting, pending any changes, of course. But as you said, the policies are a proactive movement to make sure that we have a comprehensive policy to reflect the council's risk appetite in our policies before we have a formal application for a CFD or before we pursue any debt.
Excellent. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next up, item 2A, utility easement issues. Ms. Robinson, oh, not Ms. Robinson. Worth, welcome.
Mr. Wadsworth, or Neil. Good afternoon, Mayor, and Vice Mayor, and Council. We're going to talk to you this afternoon about easements and how they affect the town, the utilities, and other utilities. So we're going to talk about the impact of easements and maintaining those easements on utility services. We're going to talk about the legal authority, best management practices, and what other communities do, and to kind of get a discussion going about whether we need to make some changes or things that we may need to do to improve education on easements or enforcement or whatever. So as you may be aware, the town manages easements on behalf of the town and for other utilities. In other words, we approve what can happen in an easement and what can't happen in an easement, and other utilities besides the town water and sewer also use those same easements. And we're going to get into a little bit of discussion about the town's authority in regard to easements and the property owner's rights and responsibilities. So this map outlines mainly the older areas of town where typically easements are behind the properties. In most of the newer subdivisions, easements are either out in front adjacent to the roadway, or the utilities are actually in the right-of-way in the roadway itself. And so we don't have these types of issues cropping up in the newer subdivisions because of that. But when the easements are behind the homes, you know, we run into issues related to access, being able to repair things and such, because they're not adjacent or in the roadways. So we've included in here the older areas of town. There's also two county areas shown on this map, one of them being Castle Canyon Mesa over near Prescott East Highway, the other one being the Prescott Country Club. Not that we have any jurisdiction in the county areas, but we as the town do have utilities. We have a water system that when we purchased the Shamrock water system, we inherited that part of the water system. So we do serve areas in the county in those two areas, and other utilities also utilize easements in those areas. Just to maybe provide a little bit more understanding. So this map shows a bunch of easements in a whole bunch of different colors up on the screen that are in place for various reasons. It could be for drainage, it could be for sewer lines. The most prevalent ones are the orange ones, and they're the smaller ones that you see, and those are labeled as PUE, which is a public utility easement. And you can see that they're all over this map, and typically in this area, they are not out in the roads, they are behind the home. So there's a house, then there's the easement area, and then there's another house, and then you get to the next street. And you can see they're everywhere on this particular image. Zooming in a little bit closer, if you look, you can see the yellow property lines, and in this line that's going up and down on the image, you can also see two fences that are offset from the property line, and that allows access and the ability for the utilities, whether it's the public, our utilities, or private utilities like APS or cable, to access and maintain their facilities. And so this is ideal. You'd like to see fences that are offset from the property line so that we can get back there. But these are typically what we're talking about. With these in the town areas, most of the time this easement is 12 feet wide, with 6 feet of it being on one property and 6 feet of it being on the other property. And so when there are obstructions in the easement, and those could be things like fences, it could be trees, it could be, somebody might put something back there that is either temporary, or sometimes people put things back there that are not movable that impact the easement. Those obstructions make it more difficult for utilities to maintain their facilities. One of the things that I'm going to get into, and I'll show you this a little bit later, is that when we have a water line that gets broken back there and we have to fix it, if we can't get to it right away, we are having water that is coming out of the pipes and going over people's properties. It could potentially be damaging people's properties, but we may not be able to get back there right away to shut it down or to do a repair. And the more obstruction and the less access we have, the longer it might take us to make that repair, not only to get back there, but we may not be able to get back there with any type of mechanical equipment. We may have to hand dig a trench, and like with our water lines, typically they're at least 3 feet deep. And so you're talking about a hole that could be 3 to 4 feet deep. It could be 4 or 5 feet wide or wider, and depending on the repair that's necessary, it could be 5 feet long, 10 feet long, 15 feet long. And so to dig an area out by hand like that, it takes a significant amount of time. And so all of the easements that are listed up here, power, cable, communications, water, gas, and sometimes sewer, are and can be located within these 12-foot areas. So it's not just one pipe down there or one thing. There could be, there's a water line over here, and then, 2 feet away, there might be a power line or a gas line in communication. So all of these things are trying to fit within this 12-foot area. And so we don't always know exactly where we are within the easement, but typically we're in that area, and we know that there's a water line there, but because the water lines are fairly old and we bought a system from somebody else, we don't have exact knowledge of where every single one of our lines is. Or is there a power line sitting on top of our water line? When they installed their power line, did they install it 3 feet away so that we can dig ours up without impacting them or having to work around them? So there's a lot of issues with where utilities are located in the easements. Oops. Hey, didn't know I had that power. Okay. So I think I've already talked about a lot of the stuff on here. I'm not going to read all of this, but so the challenges that we face are based on our access. So I've already listed some of these: trees and shrubs, vehicles, fences, walls, and when an easement gets fenced in, we also have to worry about pets. And so if we have to get in to somebody's backyard to repair something, or in the past, actually, we had to get back there and do all of our meter readings. We've pretty much gotten away from that now because all of that is electronically, and the radio transmitters send all of the reads up to Glassford Hill and then directly back to our offices. So we're not back there on a daily or weekly basis anymore for meter reading. But in that case, when we were, if somebody's dog is in their backyard, and our guys got to get through, and if they have a fence, a gate, we can open it up. If they don't, and we have to climb it, then we've got issues with, potentially a dog. Some of them are aggressive, some of them are just scared, and they see somebody coming in their backyard, they're going to protect their property. And so it takes coordination where we have to then notify a property owner and say, hey, we need to get in your backyard. Can you bring your dog in the house? And if the people aren't home, if they're on vacation and somebody's watching the dog and we don't know who to contact or whatever, then we have to contact animal control and have them come out and help. So there are a lot of issues that, unless you're doing this day to day, you may not necessarily think about these things. So I'm going to show you some examples. Here's one that I'm calling the good. So this will be a tribute to Clint Eastwood. So these are the good easements where you can see that we've got fences that are set back about 6 feet from the property line, which runs directly down the middle of this open area, and you can see we can access it. People are maintaining it very nicely. They have gates in their back area so that they can get out there and do what they need to do. And if we need to get equipment down there, we oftentimes have that ability. You can see here's a small mini excavator that we have that we sometimes need to get back down there to help us with those excavations. And if we can't get that equipment down there, then we are hand digging. So this is actually really good. So here's where it gets a little bit worse, and I'm called this one the bad. And if you look at the picture on the upper left, there are two fences. One of those is on the property line. The other one is set back from the easement. So instead of having 12 feet, we only have a 6-foot path through this area. And you can see the gentleman is looking over the fence because what he's looking at are his coworkers that are on the other side of the fence in somebody's backyard making a repair. And as you can see, there is no mechanical assistance there. They are doing a hand dig on that repair. Now this one I'm calling the ugly. So we have the good, the bad, and the ugly. Here we have a block fence and a wooden fence that are about a foot apart. So yeah, if we have a distribution guy, and most of our distribution guys are pretty, they're pretty strong, they're pretty big. Some of them turning sideways won't even make it down through that opening. In the center one, you can see one of our guys laying between two fences, hand digging to make a repair at a water meter. And then the third one is, again, you can see that on the right-hand side, there's an APS box, which is in the easement, but you can see that there's fencing that comes back into the middle of that area as well. So we do run into all kinds of situations related to that, and those are some of the things we need to talk about. So our development services gets involved in these types of issues when potentially when people come in for a fence permit, they'll review the information on where the person wants to put the fence, and generally they will make them comply with town code. But there could be other issues, could be code compliance issues. Those back easements are also for allowing lot-to-lot drainage. So if we have a slope that is going between two roads and it's sloping down constantly in one direction, then the drainage from this house is going to pass through the easement to the next people's house. And that is how the drainage was established back then. And the homeowners cannot impede that drainage. They have to allow the drainage, which has historically entered the property at a location, to continue to pass through their property even after they build their home. So they're not allowed to block that. But sometimes those drainages get diverted by homeowners who may not know that. They may regrade their property and create an impounding area back there that could, fester mosquitoes, cause lots of grass to grow. The water soaking into the ground could, damage fences and things. So there's drainage issues that come into play there. Anyways, I think I've kind of covered what this slide talks about, but development services gets involved, and when there's code violations and so forth, then they turn those over to neighborhood services to go out and have their people try to work with the property owner to correct those issues and get it back to a good condition. Public Works primarily, I think, gets involved in easement issues related to drainage, as I've just discussed. There typically aren't a whole lot of other types of reasons for the Public Works Department to get in back in there. And there are some easements that are specifically drainage easements. A lot of those, though, are actually located in the newer subdivisions where a dedicated easement has been put in specifically for drainage. Some of the maintenance, if not all of it, is on the property owner to maintain those. But the physical structures, if there's catch basins and things that are physical structures, those may actually be Public Works responsibility to maintain. But like the weeds and such are still the property owner's obligation to maintain. And that's the same thing with all the easements that we're talking about. Easements belong to those property owners. That is their property. They have given us access rights and the ability to use that, but they still own the underlying property, and therefore maintenance and taking care of weeds still remains with those property owners. A lot of people may not understand that because they move into a house, they see a fence back there, and if it's set back from the easement, they say, well, that's not my property, that's behind my property, and they just don't know that, half of that is still their property, and they are obligated to maintain it. So I think this is where I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie for a little bit here and let her continue on.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome, ma'am.
Mayor, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to continue this conversation regarding easements. And I'm going to take this over from Neil as to talk about it from a code enforcement perspective. One of the things that we certainly want to mention are the health and safety issues that accompany the easements. Our code enforcement team, of course, tries to work with either the property owner, the business owner, whoever that may happen to be, so that we can ensure that any health and safety issues are taken care of and resolved. Some of those, for instance, include things like the issues in terms of fire hazards and things of that nature. There are times, as you can see with some of the pictures there, where some of the grass and debris in that easement area can exceed what we consider to be a reasonable height. So we certainly do not want to have easements where you see 4 feet of debris and/or weeds, because even if the utility company and/or or any of our other agencies are trying to get back there, it makes it very difficult for them to get any type of equipment, even if they do have a mini excavator back there. And so, of course, we try to keep that down. The other issue, of course, that comes about whenever you have that degree of weed and debris in the rear portion of that easement, or things such as rats and rodents and things of that nature. And so, of course, we do not want any of that to, of course, become an issue for any of our residents that may happen to have an easement in their rear portion of their yard. And so there are two ways in which code compliance goes about completing enforcement. One is to be proactive, and one, of course, is reactive. And we try to err as much as possible on the side of being proactive. One of the ways in which we do that, of course, is our team will drive up and down any of the city streets and making sure, of course, as they kind of look between those easements, that they're open. And of course, they receive or happen to see anything that's going on, believe me, they will, of course, issue an NOV and sometimes even knock on the door just to let people know. Of course, we also get in that reactive portion of that a lot of complaints. If you happen to be the individual that's taking care of your portion of your easement, you certainly want to make sure that the other person who shares that other 6 feet are doing what they're supposed to do as well. And so we do receive some complaints, and when we get those complaints, of course, we go through the process of notifying that property owner, especially if there's been a change in property. They may not be aware. And so part of our job, of course, is to educate those individuals that may not be aware of their responsibility for that easement. And we do that in a variety of ways. That can be as simple as putting a door hanger on the door. We can put a business card there. Sometimes, hopefully, someone is at home, especially if they're retired and they're not working during the day. And then we'll have that conversation with them so that they're well aware what their responsibilities may happen to be. In terms of balancing education and enforcement, one of the things I think we're most proud of is our ability to be able to provide some additional resources. And so the town of Prescott Valley has this wonderful thing called a neighborhood toolbox. Yes, I'm going to plug the neighborhood toolbox right now. In that toolbox, any resident, of course, can give a phone call to our code enforcement team, and they can actually rent out a bush hog. They can rent out weed eaters or any other small tools and equipment to make it easier for them to take care of that area. So there really isn't any excuse. If they don't have the equipment, we will certainly provide it for you and make sure that you have the equipment that you need to be able to take care of that, especially when they get as tall as sometimes 3 to 4 feet. A lawnmower is no longer going to do it. They're really going to need that bush hog. We also try to emphasize the fact that it is, in fact, the owner's responsibility. Neil has indicated that several times. But it is the owner's responsibility to take care of that easement area. And so we try to find ways to not only communicate that, but also make it easy for them to maintain that. If, of course, we run into someone that does not have the ability, doesn't mean that you don't want to, but you really may not have the physical ability to take care of it, we have a variety of different volunteers that are willing to help work with people and sometimes help them out with that. We always try to, of course, get voluntary compliance. It's not our goal or desire to have to send anyone to court in reference to not clearing the easement. And most times people, once we've explained to them what's going on, most times they will go ahead and take care of whatever's going on without us having to take any type of legal recourse. So in reference to being able to prepare for today's meeting and to give council as much information as possible, we also took the time to meet with numerous utility companies. And so on the 5th of November, we had a very detailed conversation with a lot of those utility companies to figure out how the easement issues were impacting their particular organizations. And so I wanted to kind of summarize some of the feedback that we received from them. The first, of course, is that some of those utility agencies said that communication is now a critical infrastructure since COVID-19. As you can imagine, we have a lot of individuals who now work from home. And so, of course, having the ability to be able to have internet access is extremely critical. And so they were saying, of course, that they need 24/7 access to be able to make any necessary repairs. And sometimes when that individual that lives on that property does not give them that access, that can then delay others from being able to have the ability to have that internet access and to be able to communicate. As you know, a lot of people no longer have landlines, and so people, of course, use the internet, of course, to be able to communicate as well. They have found also that there is persistent denial in reference to homeowners allowing access to the rear portion of their yard or not removing their pet so that the utility company can have safe access to the rear portion of the yard. And so that, of course, has been an ongoing concern. It was interesting to listen to some of the scenarios that have popped up and some of the things that they have experienced. One that kind of comes to mind is directly related to trees. I know we've had several conversations and several pictures, of course, regarding the fences, but believe it or not, there are a lot of homeowners that may plant trees that grow at maturity to maybe 20, 30 feet. And unfortunately, there have been some instances where the roots from those trees actually grow down into that easement area, and they actually have caused some breakage in some lines. And then it takes, of course, a longer period of time in order to be able to restore services. So that was a big concern, of course, for many of them. The other issue, of course, is people not calling 811 or Blue Stake. A lot of times people will do a lot of beautification in their rear yard. They may decide they want to put some things in the rear yard or shed or anything else. And unfortunately, by not calling Blue Stake, they will inadvertently cut a line. And sometimes it may take the utility company a little while before they realize exactly where that break has occurred. Again, cutting off services to other individuals that are in the community, as well as delaying the service, the time it takes for people to get out there and be able to make the repair. Many, as Neil's mentioned before, many of the trenches are shared. They're not just a single utility company there, so many of them are shared. And APS actually noted that in some instances, they've actually had to use cranes in order to be able to get back to the rear portion of the easement. And unfortunately, that also takes quite a considerable amount of money and unfortunately time, because that larger equipment is more difficult to come by and more difficult to be able to weave and get access to the area in which they need to access. We also took the time to go through the process of seeing what was happening in our neighboring jurisdictions. We thought it was important to know, as we talked to you, what may be happening in some of the other jurisdictions as well. And so just to kind of summarize the chart that you have in front of you, of course, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Some of the consistency, I think, with Yavapai County, Chino, Cottonwood, Sedona, Prescott, and Prescott Valley is that the property owner is always responsible for the easement. That is consistent among each of course, the municipalities that are listed here. The other thing that we also wanted to note is that at least two measure any type of fence, shed, or any type of structure, not from the property line, but if you're going to get a permit for Yavapai County as well as Sedona, they measure from the actual easement line. So by measuring from the easement line, it keeps individuals from erecting some type of a fence or some type of a shed in the actual easement, because they're measuring it from the easement line, and then the setback goes from the easement line. So I'm going to turn this back over to Neil so that he can go over some of the, turn it over to Ivan so that he can go over some of the current regulations and laws. And then it'll be your turn.
Neil actually did a very good job of talking about several of these things in his presentation. When we prepared this, we knew that you would not really want to know a lot about property law when it comes to easements, and so I tried to spend a lot of time in the staff report giving somewhat lengthy, detailed explanation about easements and the history and the authority and the reasons for some of the challenges that we have, history and all of those things. I would like to emphasize, though, just a couple of things. Again, the definition of an easement. Those are not alleys back there. They're not owned by the town. They are owned by the property owner. The property owner has given us a right to use their property for the purpose of putting utility facilities in that property. And part of that right allows us to go in and fix anything that needs to be repaired. So we can install and we can fix. Those are the things that we can do. And so we have the right as a property owner, a co-owner, to use self-help, to go in and allow ourselves to use our property right. But the owner still has an underlying ability to use that property as well. And so we have to find a balance. They can't stop us from using the property as we wish, but we can't stop them from using whatever right is left for that property. And that's where some of our challenges come, that yin and yang, that conflict that goes on. Most of our easements are created by plats, and some of the plats are old, and so they don't have a lot of detail in them. Newer plats have a little more detail. The language is supposed to be uniform, sometimes it's not. We have a code that says you must include this language in it. Occasionally, the engineer that drafts it doesn't include that language, but we interpret it to mean whatever our code says needed to be in there. And so we've got a code provision that talks about the types of things that we believe is the correct balance. You can use your property up to this point, not up to this point. And that code has been in place for a long time. The other thing I need to point out is that we talk a lot about ourselves, but again, there are other utilities besides the town. The town only provides water and sewer and drainage, flood control, those types of things. Other uses of easements, of course, are electric and cable and phone and gas. Yeah. And so what we do is we have the authority to require, as part of our platting process, that the owner of the property convey an easement that can include all of these utilities, not just ours, but those utilities as well. And we have the authority to do that. We can invite those other utilities to share this easement that we have used our authority to require be given. Okay? But when it comes to the actual property right, the property right is for our water and sewer and drainage. The utilities then have been invited to come in, and they have a property right as well for their facilities. And they're ultimately the ones who need to enforce that, although we can assist them in doing that. And that's part of the challenge that we face. So the language that's in the code right now says that in that easement, you can put, and these are the words, wood, wire, or removable section type fencing, okay? Asphalt paving or grass. So that's what we say can be put into that easement. Now, that isn't a perfect solution because, as Neil has pointed out, if someone even leaves that area open or maybe goes to the center line and puts up their removable fence, if we can't talk to them, we've still got to get in there somehow. If their dog is there and not letting us in, we've got to resolve that in some way. So they can be in compliance, but we can still have challenges. And so in Neil's world, he would really like to have nothing in there if he could. If he could get away with it, that would be the way he'd like it to be done. But again, if we did that, we might as well have an alley that we maintain and that we own. So that's, again, the challenge. They are allowed to use that. And many times folks say, look, if I own it, I'd really like to put that fence out into the middle of the easement so I can put grass in and have my kids have their playthings and we can throw the ball back and forth. So that's not ideal for Neil. He'd like to have that fence right at the easement line with a gate so that folks are still going out and cutting their weeds because they're responsible for those weeds because they own it. That's our challenge. That's our ongoing challenge. And that's again one of the things that we deal with is that folks will sometimes say, well, I don't own that. That's not mine because my fence, as Neil pointed out, my fence is at the easement line. I don't want to go back there and take care of those weeds. Well, we'll be having an enforcement officer out there saying, but you own it and you're responsible for it. So we're looking for guidance from you. We're trying to find an ongoing balance between what Neil would really like, what maybe other utilities would like, and what we feel we can actually do. And then I encourage you to read that pithy language in the staff report. So, do you have any questions?
Vice Mayor?
So Ivan, none of this is unusual for a jurisdiction that's been around as long as we have.
None of this is unusual for any jurisdiction. And again, as has been pointed out, in the newer areas, we don't have this problem as much
Right.
because we don't have those back easements.
Right.
It's the older area where we have the back
And
easements.
some of that may have even been created when it was county before we incorporated.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. Right.
And sorry, Neil. You saw the email that we received from Ms. Betzel, right?
I possibly did.
Okay, so she had 3 questions, which I think you mostly answered, but it says, why does the map of town with easements concerns include Prescott Country Club? And it's because we own easements there, right?
There are easements back there, correct, for water utilities, for public utilities, and we do have water services back there, right?
Right.
And Madam Vice Mayor, those were created actually by the county in many cases, but again, they invited us to be in there because we're
By
providing water.
And then it says, have all of the owners received a notice explaining the responsibilities as far as easements and concerns? And the answer is yes, and we're going to even kick that up a notch, correct?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in the next slide in a little bit more detail.
I thought you were done.
No, we're.
Okay, well, I have one more question.
Ivan's done, I think, but I think we have 1 or 2 more slides up here.
More question.
Okay.
And then her third question was, is the town planning to levy a tax as a solution? And the answer to that is no.
Correct, it's not,
Okay.
right, we're not.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So recommendations. You asked the question about education. And I think we have educated people, but probably not as good as we could have, or maybe we can do increased education. So we're gonna talk about what we can do by putting more information on our website, things in utility bills. There are a number of things that we can do. And I think one of the areas that we may be able to help with is, when people move into a home and they haven't had an easement behind their home before, they may not know there's an easement back there. And so we think, well, you put this fence up, so there's an easement back there. Well, they may not be the original homeowner, and they weren't involved in any of that. So they get there and they don't know that there's that there's property back there that they're supposed to maintain or anything like that. So, doing more education of the homeowners is definitely one thing that we can do to help. And so we plan on doing that. We talked a little bit about the maintenance and the resources that Stephanie's team has to potentially help residents if they can't physically maintain it, that there are some programs that we might be able to get help for them to do that. And then we have the actual compliance and code compliance arm that can be a little bit more forceful if necessary, if we can't get voluntary compliance in working directly with the homeowners. One of the things that we have seen, and this is the next item, is an affidavit for fence encroachment, which is something that Sedona does. So when somebody comes in for a fence permit and they're saying we want to put it up on the property line, which is basically right down the middle of that easement, Sedona will make them sign an affidavit that says, I understand that this fence can be removed. I understand that the utility is not responsible for fixing it or putting it back up, that this is my choice to put it out there. And if there is, monetary repercussions because it has to be fixed later on, that they acknowledge all of that ahead of time. The point with that is that affidavit would then be recorded against the property. And what that does is that helps the situation with future owners of that same property. So a developer, somebody who's doing spec houses builds, if they build on a lot and they put up a fence and they go, yeah, I'm going to put up a fence here and I don't have to worry about it because I'm going to turn around and sell it to somebody else who may not know what the full conditions are. Well, now that affidavit will be signed. It'll be recorded with the property. And so when that property sells, the new homeowner will see that when they're purchasing the property. So that's something that we haven't done before that I think would definitely help. We've included that, I think, in your packet, some draft language. We would probably change it up some. And
Mr. Wadsworth, I just want to interrupt real quick.
Yes, sir.
Could that be, utilize the affidavit, be utilized retroactively to someone that already has a fence in the easement, and the town says, instead of making you remove it, just know that in the future, if there is an event, this could happen. And we need
Mr.
to-
Mayor, I could probably respond to that. We could certainly ask someone to do that. I don't believe we could require it.
Right, yeah, no requirement. It would just be part of the educational process.
Right.
And then also the other question I have is, how do we enforce easement violations for things that are in the county? Like Castle Canyon and Prescott Country Club, how would we have any say in that?
We would have to contact the county, and they would have to enforce it. In terms of a long-term solution, that would have to go through the county. There are short-term things that we can do if we need to get back there, and that would be working, with the property owner, or in the case of a property owner who was not responsive or cooperative, we would have to get either the sheriff or Prescott Valley Police Department involved in that. Typically, it's the sheriff out in the county. So if it was, allowing us to go through their side yard to get to the backyard because they have no gates, or if it was having them understand that they need to bring their dog into the house while we're out there working, we would do that. So those are the remedies typically in the county areas. The other thing to keep in mind is that there are a couple of different conditions that we could be talking about here. We could be talking about somebody who has put up a fence in a location and they actually never got a permit for it. So that's one condition. The other condition is they did come in and get a permit. We allowed them to construct the fence in that manner. We may have told them at the time, this is what you can build. It has to be wood or wire, removable panels. But they've got it there by permit. And so there are two different conditions on how and how we would enforce or respond in those cases would be different. I think did that address your question?
Yes, sir. I just don't feel comfortable with town of Prescott Valley all of a sudden becoming the easement Gestapo out there and making people that have had fences up for years and years and years when it's never been an issue before. But I do see moving forward, and I believe 100% we need to start educating and just try to bring people in with self-compliance.
Correct. And I don't think we're proposing to go out there and all of a sudden go out en masse and tell everybody who's got a fence in the easement, you need to move it now, or, we're going to come in with a bulldozer. That's not the intent.
I know we're not saying that. I just want to make sure everyone else knows we're not saying that. That's the point of that. So.
Right.
And I believe, Councilman Zurcher, you have some good information to add to this because you were kind of spearheading why we are having this in front of us today.
I mean, yes, one of the things that I see almost on a daily basis are easement issues. One instance, and I'll bring this up just so for discussion. Gentleman off of Whipsaw was constructing a fence. He had obtained he applied for a permit, started work without the permit, didn't call in locates, didn't know where his property lines were, and then augured through one of our cable lines. On a situation like that, of course, we don't discuss it, but one of the, what are we going to do if someone comes in to get a permit? Are we going to require a property survey so they know where their property lines are? Are we going to give them, easement maps? That's something that, again, in terms of recommendations, I'd like to, possibly look at. But I, first of all, thank you, for the time that you put into this. I do think what we really need here is a prolonged, increased educational campaign. And then we can get to potentially a point for enforcement, but I see that down the road. And I definitely would love to see just the increased education.
With the key word being prolonged.
Yes.
Education, I think, is important. This is something that we just need to take our time and be very efficient with for our residents.
I have a
Vice Mayor.
question. So Neil, that picture that Stephanie showed where that little white shed was definitely in the easement area, that's not allowed, right?
I don't think that was permitted.
Yeah, okay.
I
That one
I
right
took
there.
that picture.
Thank you.
Yeah, typically we would not permit something like that. So
And so maybe we could use this affidavit, if we approach some of them, we can say, listen, this is in the easement. We're not going to make you necessarily take it down, but can we talk about you signing this affidavit?
Certainly, we can take a look at those types of things. And I think if somebody doesn't have a permit, they're already at risk of us removing it and not putting it back up if we need to, if we need to get through that area. They're already at risk, and their recourse would be then to, file a suit against the town. And I think Ivan would probably argue that we've got a pretty good, defense that they never came in for a permit. They just did something that they weren't supposed to do, and now they're telling us we have to pay for it. But certainly, trying to reach out to the people who have things in easements that are, may not be aware, and this affidavit could be one avenue to help with that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, if like the best case pictures you showed, if in the best case pictures, if we need to like take down part of a concrete wall to fix something, it's our responsibility to put it back, correct? Not the property owners?
If it's in the easement, then typically no.
Okay.
Our code says that they can put up a wood fence, they can put up a wire fence and they can put up removable panel fences, but obviously that still leaves the posts, which typically are drilled several feet into the ground, and so we can't get through that area. But if they put up a concrete block that does not comply with our code, and they put that in the easement, we can, I guess by law, tear it down, do what we need to do and say, I'm sorry, this is not supposed to be here, this is not legal, and we are not paying to put it back up. That's I guess the strictest stance that we can take. Obviously, if we want to help them put it back up because we are, trying to work with them and so forth, then we could. There have been cases where we've gone into areas where we've had to fix things, because we tore them down, and whether they were there by permit or not. We try to, like people will do rock landscaping back there, and we try to, get the rock back, and we try to peel back the landscaping, and then we try to put things back and restore it as best we can. So there are different things that end up happening in that.
Councilwoman Schumacher, I believe you had something.
So I have a question too, Neil. Is the blue stake given out to the homeowners when they come in to apply for a permit so that they know that they are responsible for contacting all the utilities to come out and mark it, or is that something that the town does on their behalf?
Well, I would assume that's in their packet, but I don't deal with that on a daily basis. Maybe, Donna, do you know of that?
The blue stake is, the homeowner is notified how to handle blue stake, because I think a lot of homeowners don't think that that would be their responsibility, but it is. And as the utilities would come out, they would then mark it, so something like fiber optics or any of the other things that are located would be identified to know not to dig in that particular spot, especially for gas, because that's so highly dangerous.
All right. Well, usually, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, what we do is our engineers review for the permits for our department. I know different departments have different permits, but easements are located on the plat. We do the research to see where they're located and identified and work with the property owner.
I know that sometimes even if they think it's not there, it could be a surprise. So just
And that
notifying Blue
happens.
Stake, having them come out, marking it is going to be a protection for the homeowner. And I think that needs to be like given that information at the moment that they do say they're going to apply, in case they go ahead prematurely before they're approved and start something. So it would be, a consideration for the neighbors as well, because people can do things that also endanger other people unknowingly. They're not doing it on purpose, but maybe unknowingly if they go ahead and start before the approval process is finalized. So thank you. Just wanted
Yes,
to know.
and I do believe in certain circumstances, depending on what the request is, the blue staking does come into play. But a consistency on that, I don't believe, but I'm not positive.
Really important. All right. Thank you so much.
Councilwoman, did you have anything?
Thank you for your presentation, Neil. I have a question with reference neighbor to neighbor. suppose one neighbor takes care of their, maintains their property, and the neighbor next door does not. And they need, the utilities need access to your property, but it's, blocked by what these photos have shown, by the weeds and, different buildings and whatever to get to your property where you've been maintaining it. How is that handled with reference to notifying your neighbors and say that I have a pretty good relationship with my neighbors. I'm able to knock on doors and make phone calls and explain situations. But in some instances, I can foresee that there would not be necessarily that kind of relationship. How is that managed?
I believe Stephanie alluded to that in her discussion about enforcement, where you can, call her team in neighborhood services, and they can go out and talk to other property owners and explain the reason for the easements and see if they can get them to comply. So I think that would be the avenue that you would follow in that particular case.
So if you need work done on your property, the best thing to do is to go to the city and contact Stephanie's office and
Well,
know, what the situation is, and so that they can pursue that rather than you having to approach maybe a neighbor that isn't so open.
yeah, and I think typically what would happen is that that situation would come to light when there was a utility issue, and so neighbors may not be looking over their fence and they may not want to get involved in what their neighbor is doing or not doing. And so oftentimes when there's a utility break, water main or gas main or whatever, the utility company is going back there, they're encountering the situation, and then they're either having to work around the obstructions, as you saw with, guys working on the ground between fences. They're working around to get the problem resolved as quickly as possible. If they're not able to get it resolved because of the obstructions, then either they have to remove the obstructions while they're there, or if it can wait, they could get in contact with our code enforcement people, have them make contact with the homeowner to remedy the situation, and then go back out and fix it. One of the things that we've run into is that we do try to make water repairs as quick as we can, because when water is leaking, number one, we're wasting a resource, a precious resource, and also water can damage people's property. So we need to get out there and do something as quick as we can. I know there's been issues in the past, and I've seen some social media stuff, and I'm sure you have as well, in some cases where residents are upset because it's taken 2 or 3 days to fix a water leak that was reported. And sometimes we are responding, but it's taking us a while because we call in the blue stake request, which for emergency blue stake is 4 hours, so we've got to wait for that. But if we can't get back to that location, or there are obstructions, we may be hand digging something and it may take us 2 days to make the repair. We're not going to shut off everybody's water for 2 days and say, while we're digging, you're not going to have water for 2 days. We're going to leave that water in service as much as possible. And so they will continue to see those leaks until we can get those repairs made. And so it looks like Stephanie, I think, wants to address something relative to your question as well. So.
Yes, thank you, Neil. Mayor, members of council, your question regarding if a neighbor, I guess, is a little bit concerned, because sometimes neighbors are a little bit intimidated and they may not want to knock on that door. They can certainly call code compliance. We are quite accustomed to trying to make those complaints as anonymous as possible. And so staff will go out, take a look, figure out what's going on. And if we need to knock on a door, and sometimes people will respond directly to us, we will do that. And of course, if we're unable to make contact with someone, we will certainly then send out a notice of violation, and then they will get that information and give us an opportunity, hopefully, to be able to have a conversation and do the education that I think mayor and members of council would like us to do.
Thank you. That was sort of where I was headed. I know I didn't phrase my question that easily, but I just wanted to know what the options were for our citizens if they run into a situation like that. And thank you for
Yes, ma'am.
making that.
Mr. Davison?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just to add on to Ms. Robinson's option of calling the town, for those that don't want to call and actually talk to someone, we have our mobile app, Our PV, and you can anonymously report code violations like that. So you can go on a map. So if it's an issue behind your home, you can pinpoint it, notify what the issue is, and then it gets followed up automatically through the right town department. So that's another option for our residents.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wadsworth, do you have anything else?
Well, I think one of the final things that we wanted to promote here was potentially some discussion about whether or not stricter town code language was a desire. And so we were wanting to spark that conversation with you. I did, if I understood and what I heard, Mr. Mayor, from you and from Councilmember Zurcher, is that you're both very interested in the public education portion and enhancing that. And so, you know, if you want to discuss stricter code language, that's up to you. But wanted to leave that as an option as well.
Start with the education process, see where we can go. It doesn't mean that we can't ever come back and revisit this at a later date to see if we need to just up our practice for enforcement purposes, is my thoughts. Is that enough, sir?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Next up, we're going to be doing our service recognition for Town Council member Brenda Dickinson and Lori Hunt. Ladies, I don't know if you want to wait up here or you want to come down. I'm going to be down here. Folks, as we all know, this is the last council meeting or study session for our vice mayor and our councilwoman. And in a way to say thank you for all their efforts, I'm just going to start this off with something, and I want you all to think about it as I read this. You might have all heard it before, but I don't know if you've ever really applied it to, civil service and what council or what staff or what other people that work for a municipality really do. And it's called The Man in the Arena. It's from, obviously, Teddy Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And I think that says a lot about what an individual who wants to put themselves out there for their community, to make their community a little bit better. And I can stand here with my hand to God and know that these two women have done just that. That the town of Prescott Valley is a better place now than it was yesterday, last month, last year, or the time before they started. So with that, I want to thank you, ladies, for what you do. You will be missed. Your service will be missed. But just know that you leave here with your head high, knowing that the town of Prescott Valley is a better place. So if anyone ever asks you, what have you done for your community, you can tell them that you served as a council person for the town of Prescott Valley. So thank you. I know we have some other words that are going to be spoken, or ladies, if you would like, I know you have something that you would like to say, so if you would like to start, and we can pull the flowers if it's easier.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, staff, friends, and loved ones. Thank you for being here. And that includes everyone who is here today. You mean the world to me, and I value each and every one of you. My heart is filled with gratitude, pride, and deep appreciation for the opportunity to serve Prescott Valley over these past 4 years as your town councilwoman. It has truly been an honor to represent and work alongside such a dedicated, smart, and hardworking community of employees and volunteers. The smartest thing we did as a council, and I've said this many, many times, was to hire Gilbert Davidson as our town manager. We are so blessed. During my time on the dais, I've had the privilege to collaborate on several important projects and initiatives. One of my proudest accomplishments has been our ongoing investment in water management and conservation. I am also proud of our achievements in enhancing our parks and recreation areas, providing more spaces where people can come together to enjoy the beauty of our town, including purchasing 1,800 acres on an extinct volcano, Glassford Hill. How unique is that? Plus, we have a new hotel going up, something we have desperately needed. In addition, we've made significant strides in public safety, supporting our police force to keep our neighborhoods safe. The improvements to our roads and the setting of new street standards ensures that our infrastructure will grow with us. The town isn't perfect, but it is so much better than it was when I first moved here, believe me. Bringing our community together through our 4 new signature events has been another highlight of my time on the council. Our upcoming Winter Spectacular brought thousands from across our Quad Cities area last year and will most likely do the same this coming Saturday. And our Red, White, and Boom 4th of July over the past few years has seen 12 to 15,000 people, a far cry from what we had in 1994 at Mountain Valley Park. There are so many things I want to say. The scriptures tell us to be a good leader, you must be a servant first. It has been a very busy 4 years running from one ribbon cutting and grand opening to another, with the Prescott Valley Chamber of Commerce too. Again, serving Prescott Valley has been one of the greatest privileges of my lifetime. I am deeply grateful for your support and trust in me in helping to make Prescott Valley the vibrant, thriving town that it is. Although I will no longer serve on the council, my commitment to our community remains as strong as ever. I look forward to seeing all that Prescott Valley will accomplish in the coming years, and I believe that our future is bright and beautiful. God bless you and the town of Prescott Valley. Merry Christmas.
Well, that's kind of a hard act to follow, but I'm going to try. So, I have 38 years in government, and I'm truly blessed. But right now, I get to spend my time every day with our youngest residents. I'm talking 6 and 7 years old. And so I found my happy place, and I'm really excited about it. But we do this really awesome thing, and I'm talking to staff right now. We do this really awesome thing at the end of every day that I have to do for you guys because it seems so appropriate. And that is, I love what you do. You matter. You're important. You can do anything. And I believe in you and 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 you. Guys, you are some of the best staff I've ever worked with in my whole entire life. Keep up the good work and call me if you need me or you just want to talk. Matt, good luck. Focus on how you want people to remember you. Ken, hope you take time to meet the staff and feel that they're as wonderful as I think they are. My Michael, I love you, sister. I can say that because we do all church things together. I appreciate your moxie. Never lose it, because this council needs you. Kendall, thanks for your longevity and your caring and your heart. Miss Brenda, so excited for us that we're friends and that we love this town so much. And my mayor, I have great respect for you. Your dedication to this town is more than I have ever experienced in my 38 years from an elected official. Thank you. I'm still going to have your back, and I'm just a phone call away. So, I mentioned this, but I thank God every day for losing the election. And if you don't believe me, ask my husband. And he's really excited about it. So, you know, it's funny because instead of being given a new chapter, my gracious God gave me a whole new book to write. And like I said, I've found my happy place. And I'm really excited because I get to hang out with residents every day. And in my opinion, some of our most important residents, and those are our young people, because they're our future, right? They're the ones that are going to take our blood and take care of us and serve us at the grocery stores and maybe even be our doctors in the future. But I do have concern. You know, there were so many negative lies during the campaign and a lot of smear campaigns. And I'm so grateful that that's behind us. I do have concerns for this town and for all of our personal investments as residents, our homes and our businesses. So, Council, please focus on managed growth, the general plan, and business and families. I'm going to be watching closely. My major concern are the threats and the disparaging comments that are happening now by a council-elect and negativity. These are all distractions and likely to cost our town money. So you got to open your eyes and be aware of it. And I have an example, just so you know. It was regarding an item we had on the agenda today. So it says, and I'm quoting, "The questions in 2A need to be answered before this council takes any action. Agree with 2B. The best interest of the town have not, in all caps, aligned with the best interest of PV residents. They never do. It is always about pleasing and appeasing developers and the mayor's cadre and business ventures or the Hepperly's cadres or business ventures." I don't agree with this statement, and I hope you don't either, because it says never. So that means always. So in my mind, this is very disparaging. And if this person was saying this about me, I would have an opportunity to start filing something, and then that's where the town starts having to pay money if they lose. For comments like this from one of your electeds that's going to be sitting on the council next week. So keep your eyes open, please. So, council, it's your job to police colleagues. It's not Gilbert's job. It's not the residents' job. It's your job. And I hope you do it. Our futures, our families, our businesses are so important. So keep investing in roads and public safety and parks and lights on ball fields so that we can program our fields longer so more of our kids can have protective factors and play sports. And libraries so we can live up to our motto, the cooler side of Arizona, and not just because it's cooler here than in Phoenix, but because we're cooler. Thank you.
We kind of didn't think about this. We've got more stuff to give out than we do hands to bring it up to the front here. So bear with us on that. And we got them flowers. And then if you would show them off the plaques they got. And then, Fatima, what do you got over there? And all it is just a recognition plaque that they get. Put it on their, kitchen table or whatever they choose to do with it, and it has their name and the service time that they have. So, one more time, folks, if we can give it up for our council members leaving today. Thank you again, ladies. And with that, our meeting's adjourned. This is yours.